I'm joined now by John Lent. He's a communications professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. Thanks so much for joining us. So I want to get your thoughts on this. What would you say is the biggest difference between Chinese comics and those we see in the West, especially when it comes to style, storylines, and characters?
They're very different. First of all, what the Chinese thought of as comic books were actually picture books up until the 1990s. They were about this size. They're about two inches by 3 inches, very small, and they had one illustration per page. So they were more like picture books. But in the 1990s, they started to be influenced by manga from Japan. So the influence has been more from Japan than from the Western countries. So what I'm seeing and have seen in China for the last 20 years is mainly an influence from Japan. There is a presence of American comic books, but I recall going to a Shanghai comic book shop a few years ago, and I didn't see any American comic books in there. They were all from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan, of course.
And Professor,
yes.
Would you say there is a growing appeal of Chinese comics, or more people hearing about them outside of China, and is that growing?
Yes, I think so, and that was partially because of government help in the 1990s. The government set up a couple campaigns to help the comic book industry, and they pumped a lot of money into cartoons, comics, and animation. We were just hearing about Comic-Con in San Diego. At one point in the first decade of this century, there were probably 100 or more Comic-Cons in China, and some of them drew more than 150,000 people. Actually, two of us started one in Guiyang, and I think the first year, in 2007, we had about 150,000 people come through. So that's all been there for the last 15 years or so. But the government stopped putting the money into animation and comics because they found that they weren't able to export them. The interest was not there.
Professor, I want to ask you about this big announcement by Marvel just a few months ago. Marvel's first Chinese superheroes will debut next year. What do you make of that move and the growth of Western comic markets in China?
Well, I think there will be a growth of Western comics in China, but I wonder who created those characters. I read that the artists and storytellers are Chinese to a great degree, but who created the stories, and how appropriate are the stories for China? I suspect Marvel's done their research, but there are superheroes, and there have been superheroes in China for many years. If you go to Wikipedia, for instance, and look at superheroes, you'll see under China there are many of them. So I think it will draw interest among the Chinese to have these Marvel superheroes. There are a couple things that I find a little difficult about it, and one is that in many countries of Asia and Latin America, there are artists and writers who are working for DC and Marvel, and they're getting paid well, not as well as they do in the United States, but in those countries, they're making a decent amount of money. But some of them have been complaining that they've lost their cartoon voice because they're following stories that were done by people in New York or LA.
Interesting.
I think that's a difficult problem.
Very interesting stuff. Professor John Lent, thank you.